Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Roots Matter Live. I am your host, Large and in Charge. Not really. It is Cynthia, and I am so happy to be here with you guys. It's so great that hopefully we have people to join. I don't have anybody that's in the chat just yet, but that's okay. That's okay. We're going to have a wonderful show today. We have a research student and Zora Neale Hurston Scholarship recipient Julius Calvert here today, speaking with us about his research that he has done, um, basically about the neuroscience behind racial bias. So I'm just so happy that he is here, that he has agreed to share this wonderful stuff with us. We're going to get into all those different things that we want to get into as far as his neuroscience is concerned. I want to go ahead and just talk a little bit about our guest, but before we bring him on. So today we're going to be diving into a powerful and deeply important topic where racial bias actually begins in the human brain. Our guest research student, Julius Calvert, is exploring how prejudice may start long before conscious beliefs or political views, beginning instead in the brain's face perception systems. Julius began his work looking at online radicalization, studying how repeated exposure to extremist content reshapes the mind. But that sparked a deeper question. Does bias emerge even earlier than ideology? His senior thesis now focuses on how the brain categorizes faces, especially how regions like the fusiform face area, let me try that again, fusiform face area, and other face selective networks process racial cues within milliseconds of seeing a face. Using morphed images that blend racial identities, Julius tracks how people quickly judge that is a word, ambiguous faces. Let me stop. Ambiguous faces. Oh my goodness, I sound like 45 trying to say and see the metaphor. Through a computational approach called Drift-diffusion modeling. He can actually see when biases enter the decision process, whether it's how evidence is encoded, how fast it's processed, or whether the brain starts with a built in preference for one racial category. He hopes to connect this to neural measures like the N170 stage signal to show that racial bias isn't just a social attitude. It may be embedded in the earliest stages of perception and that has real world consequences like eyewitnesses, misidentification, and systematic discrimination. This research pushes us to rethink where racial bias truly begins and how early interventions may reshape the way we see and treat one another. Ladies and gentlemen, folks in the chat, and all the way out there, I'd like to welcome our guest, Julius Calvert. Hey, Julius, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing, Cynthia?
I am doing well, thank you. Please forgive my skills of not being able to say ambiguous.
No, I get it.
And guys, I'm at home, so you're hearing a whole bunch of yelling. That's my kid and my family saying things, even though I told them that I am recording, told to shut the fuck up. But that's neither here nor there.
I'll be lucky if I make it through tonight without one of my cats flying across the screen. So I feel you.
You know what? It's okay. That would be entertaining to be actually seeing a cat like fly across and to be honest with you, I don't necessarily think it would be a secular atheist broadcast without a cat showing up somewhere. Oh,
Oh
we
my
talked one
God.
up. We talked
Oh
one
my God.
up. Oh my God. Hey, little meow meow, how you doing? Welcome to the stream. Welcome to the Roots Matter.
My little hood rat.
I love it. I love it. I love the hood rats. It's great. Okay. Well, before we actually get into me, like, basically diving, well, you dive into your research rather. I'm just asking questions. I wanted to just give a little bit more about you. So, Julius Calvert is an aspiring cognitive neuroscientist who is currently in his senior year of his undergrad study. He researches how our brains facilitate the perception of recognition of faces and how those split second visual processes can feed into both individual and systematic racism. He is particularly interested in the early stages of visual perception. Julius focuses on seeks to explore how space selective neurons in the brain extract and encode identity related information within faces using both human and non human primate models. In human applications, he is exploring how to subsequently cognitive representations shape rapid social judgments and how those judgments lead to recognition of memory biases. He is currently working on his senior thesis that uses face morph and recognition and reaction time modeling to explore the categorization dynamics of racially ambiguous faces. Julius is passionate about helping to develop mechanistic models of comparative face perceptions in using this research to inform real world issues such as bias, discrimination, eyewitness misidentification, and violent extremism. And again,
Thank
welcome.
you.
And again, welcome. Yes. I usually try to go through these different bios and like read them, but by the time I get on air, all that goes completely out the window.
Yeah.
So so let's go ahead and just get into this whole topic. I want to first ask you what first inspired you to shift from studying extremist communities to studying where bias begins in the brain?
Yeah. So I first started this journey with an internship. This is at the National Consortium for the Study of Terrorism and Responses to Terrorism. And this is actually a DHS affiliated research center. And it looks into the nature of domestic extremism from a scientific perspective. And it helps formulate, sort of these interventions or these policy initiatives to aid, law enforcement and lawmakers. And I actually, during this internship, I worked on one of their largest databases. This is the Pyrus database, the profiles of individual radicalization within the United States. And my task was to basically take these individual cases and look into specific aspects about the cases. Like a lot of people, were in his database because they were arrested for some type of terrorist act or hate crime, and to look at, factors like if they had prior weapons training, what type of weapons did they use in the crime, when did their radicalization begin, and all sorts of variables related to that. And at this time, START was building another database that compiled this information into a separate database that looked at the characteristics of the actual plots themselves. And I remember just being really fascinated by what motivated, these people who are radicalized to commit violence, especially against other people. um, a large part of this database, no matter what some other people may say, is heavily inspired, by far right ideologies. Um, I mean, over half of all the cases in there are committed by different types of this umbrella of far right, people who are radicalized in that space. And it's really interesting because there is research, that shows that nonviolent actions do happen. For example, a change in voting behavior after radicalization or in the process of being radicalized. or support for extreme policies and candidates and everything like that. But we also know that radicalization isn't a linear process. So I started to really ask, what drives some people to commit violence? This was essentially my first question when I started to shift. And this question kind of evolved and expanded over time into other lines of inquiry once I began digging into some more scientific literature on the issue. And most of this literature is centered in fields like, social psychology. There's also social neuroscience and a subfield of political neuroscience as well, where they use biological methods to explore these, social phenomena and also political phenomena. But at this time, I was becoming interested in the relationship between these cognitive and emotional states, mental states, these factors that modulated the behavior associated with the actual belief itself. Um, and what really fascinated me was that it's you start to kind of see it's not about necessarily the ideology itself. um, and so it's a lot of it is this repeated exposure to content, especially for far right radicals and people who are becoming radicalized on that field, is this overexposure and constant exposure to content that is often racist, anti-immigrant and anti-LGBT, misogynistic content. And I really kind of started to ask, how this exposure could subtly change the way people perceive other people. A lot of this content, when I was doing research in this specific field, would often feature, a picture, like a mugshot of a black man, for example, and they would share this around in these private group chats, and would have a caption like, feral N-word murders young white baby or something like that. And it just had me thinking, like, they're seeing these faces, these outgroup faces, and these faces are being associated with these really egregious crimes. And of course, they have these really emotionally charged captions and everything that goes with it. And a lot of the time, they're not really accurate cases that they're talking about. Um, and so it really led me to realize that it might just not be about belief. It could, be fundamentally how information is processed and represented in this socially meaningful, manner,
Mhm.
especially for those outgroup members. And one of the things that is really important to think about is, our brains are incredible information processing machines.
Mhm.
Nearly every thought, emotion, belief, moral is facilitated by the brain.
Mhm.
And our cognition, is a part of that. So if exposure to these negative outgroup images and this media can change thinking, then I started to think, well, could bias start even before the first stages of radicalization occur? Maybe in the way that the brain enables us to see other people, irrespective of any ideology. And this is what, kind of led me into the realm of face perception.
Yeah, so can you explain specifically in your own words and explain it to me specifically, like I'm five? What is brain face perception? Like, what is the system itself, and why does it matter so much when it comes to social behavior?
Yeah. So, I previously alluded to this, but, our brains can be thought of as an information processing machine. Every sense, whether it's touch or smell, hearing, or vision, is received by and processed by the brain. And vision is a very important sense, and we can see its importance in the localization of visual areas. There are specific, there's a specific cortex in the brain, the primary visual cortex. It sits at the back of the brain in the occipital lobe, and it handles nearly all of the incoming visual information through a retinotopic pathway that comes in, and it goes through the thalamus and it goes all the way back to the brain. And we can also see how important face perception is because there are specific areas within this object recognition, this visual, these visual parts of the brain that respond selectively to faces. And they're distributed throughout the brain, but they mostly kind of cluster in this sort of what's called the ventral region, or ventral stream of processing down kind of in the occipital and temporal areas of the brain. And along this ventral stream, we do have some dedicated face areas. There's the fusiform face area, and also the occipital face area. These are kind of the two main ones. And the OFA is this kind of early face processing area, and it detects the elements of a face, sort of like the edges and the contour, the shapes of the features, like the mouth, the nose, and the eyes as well. While the FFA kind of helps process more complex aspects of a face. Um, and this is related to the identity information of the face. And there is compelling evidence that does show that this face processing system is organized in a hierarchical way, such that this information is processed and transformed from these early regions of the basic elements of the face to these identity specific representations. And then as it travels up to some higher order regions in the prefrontal area, then you start, integrating information about this sort of semantic information about the face. Like if it's a black face, you might think, if you're someone who's, high on prejudice, you might think, oh, well, they must be a criminal, or I hope they don't steal my car or something. Um, and it's not really a feed forward process, too. Um, but there are these, representations that are processed hierarchically, and you can also see that in the neural patterns as well. And it is important to say that, overall, my field of cognitive neuroscience is concerned with how information is represented and then transformed by the brain. And a lot of the resulting mental processes that we have can lead to these motor processes, which facilitate behavior and action as well. And faces are inherently social. They contain a lot of social information, like who is this person? Do I recognize them from somewhere? Are they happy? Are they sad? Are they angry? Is this a man or a woman? Somewhere in between? Is this an older person, a young person? And in this sort of sensation, perception, motor pipeline, faces provide these socially meaningful processes. For example, if you're a woman and you're walking home at night, it's dark, and across, coming down the street, you see a man, and you kind of see his face. He looks a little angry. Maybe his gaze is lingering just a little bit too long on you. Um, so then you change direction and you go to the other side of the street. Um, and this is this sensation. So you have this visual. You see the face. It's a face, and then you have this perception. Oh, it's a male face. And then the face is also angry. He's staring at me. And then you get a motor response. Your brain tells your legs, okay, go this way, move. You make that decision, and your brain enables your legs to move in another direction. So faces can also help us make decisions that are relevant to our safety or perceived safety. But also on the flip side, they help us decide who we want to socialize with. So this is why I say, faces are inherently social.
Well, with that being said, because I'm thinking to myself as you're talking, especially about what's happening in the brain, especially when we are looking at faces, when we're recognizing faces, and how even like some information is being translated in the brain. I'm wondering how mechanisms like propaganda are actually working on the brain in order to kind of fuel these particular, biases that people have, and even if they are inherently nature, or is it nurtured, right? So
Right.
let's get into your research, because I think that depending on like your findings and like how you're going about your research is going to explain that a little bit further. So you mentioned you use more faces
Mhm.
to blend racial identities. Can you walk us through how that experiment actually works?
Yeah. So the use of morphed faces for my senior thesis is kind of really rooted in me wanting to explore like how people decide which racial category a face belongs to. So to do this, I needed faces that kind of sat anywhere from, either being clearly Black or clearly Latino. And I chose those specific, I guess, ethnic groups of faces because my university is mostly Black and Latino. And so you kind of, in a lot of these studies, one thing that you can do to help control um, is to have the participants ethnicity match the faces that they're seeing, and you kind of create this cross paradigm where the Black participants will also see the Latino faces and vice versa. So that's why I do have Black and Latino, but it could be white or Black or um, Asian and Latino, or just any kind of blend. But I did also want to have ambiguous faces. And one thing that I wanted was some way to systematically vary this transition in the sort of face space from having what's called like a highly typical Black face and a highly typical Latino face on one end, to really kind of be able to systematically blend those features to go between the two and create this middle point, this ambiguous face. And so I took to get those ambiguous faces. I did take some faces from the Chicago Face Database. It's a popular research database for face perception people. And I took 20 Black faces, 20 Latino faces. These were equally split among gender. They're all rated as being highly typical for the racial category, as well as the gender category, and all were standardized for lighting, luminance, and all of that. And then I aligned them pixel by pixel on these sort of landmark features like the mouth and the eyes. Um, and then this helped every face kind of line up so that whenever I did the morphing, there's an effect you can get called ghosting. And I didn't do this the first time I tried to do it, and it's that they come out so bad, like the eyes are stacked on top of each other and the nose is way over here, and it's horrible. um but
Sounds
after I
like
got them,
I was about to say, sounds like you're actually creating zombies or something like that with that particular morph phase.
oh, they
Or
looked like that's how they came out, and I was like, okay. So I'm like, I need to figure out what to do. So
gotcha.
it was the landmarking actually really helped center. And then I used PCA. This is basically a data reduction tool, and this allowed me to kind of break down each face into these essential, like visual ingredients, if you will. And technical terms, it produces PCs, or principal components, and these are really useful when you're trying to figure out um, which components of the face make up certain aspects. And I was really focused on this typicality, this sort of racial aspect. So a lot of it was focused on like the skin luminance, but also this sort of geometry between the features. Um, and then once they were in that sort of shared face space, I created pairs such that, there's a Black face, Latino face, and then I morphed them systematically in increments of like 25% from 0 to 100. Um, and in the study, the participants will never see this full continuum. So they never really know whether it's a morph. And they also won't be able to tell, well, is this only a 25% mix or is it a 75% mix? They're not, comparing the faces. They just see one face at a time in a totally randomized order, and they simply make a choice. Does this face look Black or Latino? And this is the categorization task in the experiment. And because these trials are randomized, and they do see the faces many times across the session, I'm hoping that with these morphs, I can really tease apart the subtle ways that their decisions shift depending on how ambiguous a particular face is.
Do you
Um,
have any preliminary data concerning when looking at these morph faces, even though that these faces per se don't necessarily belong to particular individuals that anyone knows, right? Because they're composites of different faces that
mm,
you've taken from other areas. Do you have any preliminary data to show like reactions for others who may be able to see these particular faces, and what kind of what kind of like mindset or point of view that they come up with when they see them in the first place?
yeah, so I don't have any preliminary data at the moment. Actually, there's a lot of bureaucratic stuff, getting through the IRB process and making sure, it's ethical, get ethics approved and all of that. So I am looking to start actual data collection in January. But there is another study that used a similar method. I use what's called drift-diffusion modeling, DDM. Um, and I can send you that paper, but they did a similar paradigm where they were looking to see, how this evidence sort of accumulates when they're looking at the faces and how they can categorize that.
Yeah.
Um,
Can you talk a little bit more about that, about drift diffusion modeling, and basically what it reveals as far as like traditional reaction, that traditional reaction time studies don't actually really reveal?
yeah. Um, So these reaction time studies, they're great studies. And they usually tell you how fast someone responded to the stimulus, or whether they matched a choice correctly. And this is really useful, for example, in a classic cross race effect paradigm, where participants, see faces of either race and they're, asked to provide a categorization sometimes. The task does change depending on what the researchers are trying to look at, as far as this perceptual bias goes, the cross race effect. But usually they do complete a memory test that assesses how well they recognize and remember faces, especially, this same race versus other race face. And it has been replicated over and over and over and over again for at least the past, wow, like 4 or 5 decades, that we misidentify faces of other races more, and we also have trouble differentiating between faces of other races more. And so, in a colloquial sense, some people say, well, they all look the same to me. And it's like, they perceptually, they probably do, which is really concerning. And one of the reasons why it's really, really important to understand, the mechanisms of this bias, because it's really dangerous. But these reaction time studies are great, but they don't tell you exactly what's going on in the mind during that split second categorization. So, drift diffusion modeling, this DDM, lets me kind of open up this box into the reaction. Um, this reaction time. And every time a participant sees one of these faces, whether it's clearly one group or completely ambiguous, their brain must gather these little bits of evidence before committing to a category. Um, and this evidence, I think, what I'm trying to explore in this as well is, is this evidence gathered perceptually? Do they look at these features and then that enables them to make a snap judgment? um, is their brain basically asking, do the features I'm seeing push me towards black or towards Latino? And so DDM really treats that decision kind of like filling up a bucket with drops of water. And the water is, the evidence. And when enough evidence accumulates, um, they make a categorization. They say, this face is black, this face is Latino. In the real world, this face is whatever. It's a man, it's a black woman, it's a young black woman, it's an older black woman. Um, and it's really, really important. And this is what's really cool about DDM. So reaction time studies, measure down to the order of milliseconds. And what the DDM does is kind of breaks this down a little bit further to see where that evidence is being accumulated on the order of milliseconds. We see a face and automatically, bam, we know, okay, that's Cynthia. I remember her. She's a woman. She's a pretty woman. She's a black woman. So it happens very, very quickly, and that's what's so cool about this DDM is because you really, really get to model how quickly this decision process happens, rather than just saying, "Well, it happened this fast," which is usually what reaction time paradigm does.
Well, great way for buttering up the host. I appreciate that very much. Uh, but I know that, like you mentioned, that you didn't have I know that you were getting to the more data sets in January, but where, based on your preliminary findings, like some I maybe early findings, does bias seem to enter into this decision process? At the very start during the evidence gathering or near the
Yeah,
final
so
judgment?
even though I don't have any real data until you know January, and then after all the processing and everything, and analyzing probably May, um, there are some possible ways based on some of the literature that I've been reading for the review, uh, and there's kind of two main ways that I'm thinking the bias could show up here. The first possibility is this sort of maybe top down influence, and this top down is kind of a term in perception and information processing that basically means your expectations of what you're perceiving can affect the way it is perceived, versus this bottom up is it's just pure, what you see is what you see. And we know it doesn't work one way or the other. They interact quite a lot. But the one way that it could show up is kind of as this top down influence, which would be a starting point bias in the actual like terms for the model. um, and this doesn't mean that the person like consciously thinks, oh well, I bet this next face is going to be Latino. It's a little bit more subtle. It means their decision system comes into the trial with a tiny lean towards one category. And then it's kind of like a mental prior that's shaped by experience, also familiarity. Like I said, our campus is mostly Black and Latino, so they do kind of have more experience with seeing, one another category. This is actually really important. They was kind of debated. I'm not going to be a nerd about this, but it's kind of debated whether experience
Oh,
influence uh, the cross race effect for a while. Um,
oh,
and it
please.
still is it still is debated, and there's mixed findings, and I think it's just something that can be solved with different types of modeling at the end of
Mhm.
the day. Um, but um, if someone's sort of visual system is less tuned to the features, though, this is kind of another possibility of more of a bottom up bias. And this would kind of show in what's called the drift rate, the rate of evidence accumulation in this DDM model. And this tells us, how efficiently the brain is extracting these visual features that distinguish the groups, this race diagnostic information within the face. So we could also, could also see something like this once data is analyzed, and it would kind of signal that it's more of a perceptual issue, in the way that maybe they really don't have a lot of experience as well, and because of that they're less efficient at extracting, especially when it's the ambiguous face. And but it's also equally important to kind of consider that these two biases don't operate in isolation. This top
Mhm.
down and bottom up type processes, they interact a lot. So it's kind of exciting to see what will come of it, when the data is analyzed. So
Yeah, we're gonna probably have to bring you back for a part two after January is concerned, so that we can actually start to talk about the data that you actually get. I go
yes.
back and forth between saying data versus data. It is what it is.
Don't switch up on me. The data,
The data.
literally the
the,
data.
the literally the data, as she says. And listen, don't feel bad about, going nerd. I need that in my life. That is basically how we plug in. I mean, like, especially like when I'm bringing people on, to talk about like these, certain things, especially when we're going into the intersection of racial bias versus like science, like swoon for me.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
like yes, I feel all that. No, so let let's get into like the brain behavior connection. So you mentioned early in especially like in the preliminary information that you sent to me that you're interested in using EEG to look
Hmm.
at the N17 signal. What would it mean if racial ambiguity changes that early brain response? And before you actually answer the latter portion of that question, I want you to explain EEG and the N170 signal to our audience, please.
Yeah. So EEG is short for electroencephalography. Cephalography. It's have you ever seen maybe like in a sleeping study or something where they have these little caps and it has the wires coming out and it's hooked up? It basically measures
Absolutely.
electrical signals throughout the scalp, because it's really conductive, that bone, and it does. You can see, okay, well, this neural activity, it needs to fire. Neurons do need to fire, and they produce this electrochemical activity, and you can actually measure those electrical signals with EEG. Now, the N170 is what's called an event related potential, or ERP for short. And this is a face selective kind of electrical component that shows this negative deflection, about 140 to about 200 milliseconds after someone views a face. And it's usually recorded over this occipital temporal region where the OFA are and the FFA. Um, and this phase selective signal usually peaks about 170 milliseconds after a face appears, and it reliably occurs even before we are aware of the face. And so this has suggested that it signals the structural encoding of a face. And this happens in about, less than 200 milliseconds um, when we see a face. This is incredibly fast. We're not even aware that we're providing this mental sketch of the face, and so that's actually really kind of cool just thinking about it. Like it happens so fast and so quickly. But basically, yeah, this N170 ERP is electrical signal that kind of suggests that there's this very early quick sketch of the face that's happening in this sort of cognitive representation of what object we're looking at. um, and as far as racial bias, um, when we talk about these racially ambiguous faces, the N170 becomes particularly informative, especially for kind of teasing out later racial bias and uh, categorization that comes after this primary sketch, if you will. Um, and this is because like at this brain, this stage, the brain isn't really thinking about in explicit social categories yet. There's virtually no judgment or um, stereotyping that's going on, but it is picking up on the visual cues of the face as it's trying to determine what it is that it's looking at. So if a face has features that don't clearly match the patterns we've learned from these everyday experiences,
Mhm.
like an ambiguous face, the N170 has been shown to shift actually. Sometimes it's a little larger in amplitude. And then also, its latency increases. It takes a little bit longer to resolve, if you will. And those neural patterns suggest that the brain is having to work harder to figure out the structure of that face. It has to produce more energy. And this has also been similar using fMRI methods as well. Um, when looking at faces of races that don't belong, the less typical those faces are of that category. There have been some studies that have shown there is more hemo, more blood that's needed for those cells in those face selected regions because they have to process that ambiguous face more. And um, it's kind of really important, especially with the N170. Um, at least to me, when we're talking about prejudice, is it, it doesn't seem like there's necessarily a bias yet, but it's more about the perceptual tuning of
Mm.
whatever object.
Mhm.
And we build expertise for the kinds of faces we see more often.
Mhm.
Um, and ambiguous faces oftentimes fall between, these templates. And so they may not exactly we may not be very familiar and experienced with some of these ambiguous faces. And so the N170 kind of gives us a peek into these very earliest moments when the brain is trying to answer a basic question, what am
Mhm.
I looking at, before it even gets to who is this.
Mm.
And so when we study racial ambiguity, this N170 really helps understand how quickly these perceptual processes shapes what's coming next, these judgments, these categorization decisions, and ultimately the biases that we see in later behavior.
Well, that kind of leads me into my next question about what do these face processing differences tell us about issues like eyewitness and misidentification and discrimination?
Yeah, this is a really huge question. Um, it's actually, one of the reasons why I study what I do. Because, when we talk about these things like eyewitness errors, these, profiling or everyday kind of judgments, we're not just talking about these opinions or these abstract processes that happen in our society where in my opinion, from what I study, we're talking about how the visual system itself handles faces. And we know that people generally recognize and categorize faces from their own racial and social group more accurately than outgroup faces, the cross race effect, for example. There's also, other gender effect, um, cross age effect as well. And so a number of studies actually measure racial bias to see if this influences the magnitude of, the cross race effect, for example. And results are mixed. There is some evidence, that these higher levels of racial bias tend to increase the magnitude of this cross race effect, so much so that it can lead to these outgroup homogeneity type biases, like they literally all look the same. Um, and I think this is really important. Bear with me because I'm going to tie this in. Um, we do know, even in low bias participants, though, there still is a baseline cross race effect. It is just it really seems like it is just a perceptual reality. You don't necessarily need to have this bias in order to show this effect, which is really unfortunate because I think a lot of people, for example, you'll hear, well, I don't see color. Well, unfortunately, we do. Our brains do. It's unfortunate. Probably go ask a evolutionary psychologist about maybe why that is.
Yeah,
But
I'm sorry, I have to interject. Every time that I hear a person who's especially non-melanated say I don't see
Mhm,
color, I completely get triggered because what we know about this nation especially is that everything that we have built a system on was based on color. You know, and I often talk about like the whole like, construction of race, right? And how this is not inherently a natural thing. It was basically made of social structure in order to keep
right,
people who were in power, and to keep people who were not in power separate, so that they could not come against the power structure, right?
right.
So, and it's not like that we're not still experiencing those effects to this very day, even though they happened centuries ago. But when you are continuously maneuvering a structure, a system, based on that very right, this is something
Exactly.
yeah, this is happening. It's interesting how it translates itself in the brain per se, right? But I think it's like extremely interesting, especially how like the brain is taking what we're seeing and then processing it to actually take what we have been informed by people who actually ends up in these particular groups, like the out groups that you're talking about, in groups versus out groups,
Yeah,
and then like how it translates to how we treat them, how we and even how like other things actually function in our particular society. And I want to talk more about the broader impact, right? Because like the research is fascinating. I'm not even going to lie. And I wish I was a smarter being so that I could really like dive
oh
into
my
deeply,
god.
because it's no, it's like super fascinating because like I consider myself like a student of history and a student of sociology. So I'm looking at it more like a human behavior versus like what historically has happened. But there is
Hmm.
actual science that's behind the behavior and the structure that was created in the first place. And I just find that just like compelling and very interesting, because it really, to me, starts to say like, okay, so if we know these particular things, right,
Yeah,
what is the best type of tactic on how we combat it so that it will not be something that would be adverse to people who happen to be part of these outgroups, right? So, how might this research actually inform policies and training or interventions aimed at reducing racial bias?
Yeah. So this is something that I'm still, you know, kind of fuzzy on, especially because I am an undergrad. Hopefully, we'll be going into grad school next year and kind of working my way up to getting a lot more expertise.
Yeah, I
Um,
need the undergrad to go to the grad to go to the PS. I need all that. I need you on CNN. Basically, this is
oh
what I'm telling
no,
you.
oh
Yeah.
not CNN. Oh
Yes.
no, the
Yes,
way they tried
ma'am.
to set up Jasmine Crockett. No,
I
no, they
no.
be trying to set her up.
Oh yeah, I know they do, but see, we need more smart Negroes in those particular seats to actually shut that stuff down. You dig what I'm saying?
You know,
Uh,
I'm from the project, so I
okay,
don't
yeah.
know if I could contain myself if they tried to set me up like that.
I
They might have to go to commercial.
I need
I'm
see.
just saying,
You
because
know what? Here's the thing. But fam, let me tell you something. No, that's exactly what we need. That energy though.
oh Lord,
Like I
no, we do.
see. Right. I see what you're doing.
Yeah.
I'm about to call you out for it. They may have to take me on put us on commercial real quick. But before we do, I'm about to tell you about your whole ass right now. I'm about to tell you one real quick in the most structurally sound, scientific way possible that's probably going to go over your head because you're a dummy, but it's okay. So, but you need to know about yourself quick, fast, and in a hurry. So,
Oh my God.
so no, I need,
Trust,
I
you
need,
will be dealt with.
yes, yes, that part right there. That's, I need that energy. But yeah, continue.
But getting that expertise is going to be so useful because I think it'll allow me to um, think more like effectively of how we can actually approach this, to inform policies in these interventions. Because one thing, there's ethics, right? You don't, let's imagine we get to a point in this research, and it's not just me doing, there are some really, really amazing, students and professors out there who do similar research. So let's say collectively we come up with some magic pill. I don't know, sell it for $2, racism be gone. Okay. Um, where you can't make people take anything. You can't make people take medicine. I mean, unless they're admitted and I don't know, they're going to die, right? And you need to, give them, I don't know, I'm not a doctor, so painkiller or something like that, right? So it's just really hard because there's that ethics part of it, but then there's also this participation aspect. And culturally here, we tend to value individual freedom a lot of time to the detriment of our country and society as a whole, in my opinion.
That part.
Um, for example, um, domestic extremism in Canada, for example, their government has some programs that actually can offer interventions other than just going to jail, um, unless they commit a crime. Um, then they go to jail, but they have rehabilitation programs for people who were radicalized, and they help reintegrate them into society. Um, and imagine something like that here, especially because our biggest problem with radical extremism here are from right, people on the right. They tend to be white people, um, and a lot of the radicalization is based in hate for out groups who happen to be Black people or Latino people, women, and so exactly you go on and on. And and so imagine trying to have a program like that here where even before they commit a crime, you try to help. You know, it's I don't think it's ever going to happen with the government. There have been some startups, some programs that actually one of them, Moonshot, for example, they partnered with Google, and like they use like the targeted advertising stuff. And whenever they noticed people were searching, like someone searching for this type of content, um, they would then start showing ads about like, hey, are you feeling scared? Are you feeling threatened? Do you think your resources are going to be taken away? And then it, would offer them therapy services. And in some cases, they could connect to, like an online chat therapist and kind of
Mhm.
talk through, because the goal isn't necessarily to change their mind. These programs, they want to,
Yeah.
but the most immediate thing is please don't go out and shoot up a mall.
That part.
And
Because
right. And
I mean, because like I
I mean,
mean,
sorry to say it that way, but it's like, please
no,
don't, like,
yeah, yeah, please,
breathe. And
please, yeah. I need you to like breathe and not like drive like 200 miles away from where you live so that you can shoot up a grocery store because there's a bunch of Black people in it. Like, I need you not to do that.
exactly,
I mean,
exactly.
but it's interesting that you say that. It's because it just seems like that the people that we have in charge, and I mean, like, even for a long time, are not quite interested in coming up with preventative measures in order to keep people
Exactly.
from going extreme, right? And I think a lot of it has to do with this whole thing that we don't want to actually believe that the people who are the extremists are the ones who are the extremists, right?
Hmm.
I mean, even now we have the rhetoric that's coming from the top that it is those radical leftist wokist Democrats that
It's the
are,
Mamdanis.
yeah,
And
yeah, yeah. All these people. These are the ones who are like putting into like the violent rhetoric that's causing the problems, right?
exactly,
And that's like,
exactly.
and they're like the exact opposite. And especially like when you look at a lot of the people who have committed, you know, I was even thinking about that this person that that they finally caught, that is supposedly the pipe bomber, right?
Hmm.
Look more into his background. He was a person who sympathized with the right. Even though like he looked like you, he looked like me, but still that does not necessarily stop you from thinking
Right,
not the way that, like, I would say that typically that we people who happen to be of our particular racial background think, right? I mean,
right,
because, yeah, and I mean, like, and even when it comes to like race, that doesn't necessarily mean that your thought pattern is going to automatically lean left or lean center or any of those things. Like, you can still go extremist, because another thing that America specifically, I mean, like, this has happened in other nations as well, but America specifically loves to find another out group to blame for the problem, right? Like, I'm thinking that when 45 at the time came down that elevator when he ran in 2015, going into 2016, and the first thing he did was saying, "Oh, those undocumented immigrants that's coming from Mexico and all these other different Latino countries, they're rapists, they're murderers, they're terrorists, they're this, that, and the third." I'm and even like I'm looking at like the things that's happening in Minnesota concerning the
hmm,
next targeted group are Somalians, when you had a pretty large contingency of that group specifically in Minnesota that supported him. And and even in his first term and his second, like, first term and second term, he bombed that country.
they don't
Right,
you know
And
Woo!
fam, I'm sorry. I'm going to say my piece, and then I'm going to let you go ahead and talk because
No, no, it's fine.
no,
I'm just thinking like,
yeah. I
man,
mean,
we could go on all night
all,
about
you really could.
like,
You totally could. I mean, and this is why this whole topic is just so fascinating because you really start to like, try to understand people's behaviors and even what is making their brain think the way that it's thinking in the first place. Like, what makes you think that if you align yourself in this particular area that you're not going to be targeted, that you're going to be safe, that you have
right,
entered some type of safe haven in this particular hierarchy, which we call racism, white supremacy. I don't understand why you would think that way, but hey, who am I, right? I'm just another talking head on freaking YouTube. So I mean, it's
the
a beauty
leopards
like
are
that.
always hungry.
Hello,
They're
and
always
there's
hungry.
and
So
there's always somebody out here to fuck around and find out. But please
yeah,
continue.
you, like you bring up a really good point though.
Mhm.
Like, how do you align yourself in these spaces that don't want you? They don't like you, who you are just by existing. It reminds me of like during the first term, the LGBT for Trump. And, I just have to scratch my head and say that's some white people shit. Because what? Like, what? I guess. I mean, he does, talk kind of zesty sometimes. And, well,
Lord Tamersky.
him and Bill. So, no. But,
That bubble. But
no,
continue.
let me stop. Let me stop because I might, disappear after this. So let me
No,
stop.
you're good. You're
But
good.
as far as having these research initiatives kind of inform these interventions, I really do think that it's going to take a lot more science communication. You know, people, kind of like me, but hopefully more senior people actually getting out and talking about the science that they do and help kind of break it down. Because a lot of the times, what you'll see is, oh, well, this person studies, race. They're a Marxist, liberal, whatever, and they're, all, and it's like, that's not really how
Pinko,
it goes down. It's
Pinko,
pretty
commie,
mundane.
socialist, Marxist,
Yeah.
woke. That's the bad four-letter word that all of us
Yeah.
that happen to inhabit this space. We take on that moniker. I'm like, listen, if you want to go ahead and put the moniker of woke on me,
And I love this that a lot of us are, kind of wanting to reclaim that because they took it and they tried to run with it in a different direction. But sometimes you got to trip them,
yeah,
and kind of just be like, okay.
yep.
Um, but I'm not exactly sure how we can do that without the science communication aspect and also speaking with our community leaders, particularly maybe local school boards, like, hey, if guys notice something, please send out maybe PSA to the teachers or the principal. There are signs for things like becoming radicalized, that you can help do for early prevention. And then also with our lawmakers, I think we do need some stronger policies that kind of curb this hate speech that just festers in the online space, and it pushes people towards becoming more and more radicalized. So I kind of think now, kind of as a slightly uninformed undergrad, like that's maybe where we can go from here. Um,
You're way more informed as an undergrad than some people who have like doctorates are. I mean, like I've heard people who have been in scientific spaces, like when it comes to speaking about topics like this, they are woefully ignorant. And not only are they woefully ignorant, they actually exude a machismo or a bravado,
Mhm.
that they are still um, learned because of their other accolades, but they just refuse to actually acquiesce to the point that this is a topic that they are completely behind on when it comes to knowledge, when it comes to history, even in your particular space, when it comes to the science of studying these things. And
Right.
because you are right, this is a threat that we are having right now, that we are having young people that are radicalized by the right to the point where they feel that they have to take action in order for
Yeah.
them to be able to, make a statement or fix a perceived problem. you
Yeah.
know I think even um recently, like after what happened with Charlie Kirk happened, and how there were other school shootings that happened either on that day or after that, and all of those people were young, and they were all radicalized in some shape, way, or form by these particular groups that they happen to find, whether if it's in like Reddit subreddit,
It's
um
that TikTok.
yeah,
It
all of these.
those quick, little
Yeah,
clips,
yeah,
especially with
exactly.
the Charlie Kirk content, just
Yes,
and at
yes.
first it doesn't start out. Here's the thing that gets
Mm,
me. It doesn't start out with the more radical things that he
mm.
would say just
Yeah.
yet. It
Yeah, yeah,
starts
yeah.
out as we believe in God and we believe in tradition and this and this and that.
Yeah, the
And
more
then the more
innocuous
you
stuff.
watch, it becomes more radical. And by
Yeah,
that point, you've already formed an impression that you like this person and they're
yeah,
charismatic. So
yeah,
you're like, oh, I can waive maybe what he says, or maybe there is truth to what he's saying about not, letting your kids be around black people. Huh.
yeah, yeah.
It
I
it
yeah.
it's sinister. It is very sinister.
Yes. Oh my gosh, you just said my favorite word. I've been using that word for so long. It's very sinister. But you're right. I mean, because like you would listen to some of these people who happen to be, agents of chaos specifically that's
Hmm.
online. And when you first come into the room, it seems like the things that they're saying are pretty innocuous, right? Oh, God actually blesses those who take a stand against righteousness, for righteousness, right? And then you might even hear scripture that goes along with it. The kingdom of God suffereth, and it suffereth for righteousness, um, or one of the ones that I would hear sometimes when I was still in church was the kingdom of God suffereth violence, and the violence taketh by force, and and it's really, trying to like turn these like young people into soldiers per se for the Lord. And then the other more problematic rhetoric starts to come behind it,
Hmm.
and even for those who happen to be on the other side of this, whether they are just like, people who are those who listen to these people, pay attention or whatever, or even if they're thinking that they're paying attention in some type of shape, way, or form to talking heads that are, because they're speaking their language and they're learning more about news and politics and things of that nature, that in some cases, if they're not careful and if they don't use critical thinking and skepticism, they can find themselves falling into rabbit holes too. I
Yeah.
mean, like I was I was just in an argument over a week ago with a person that I've known for quite some time, who's also an atheist, who has completely given himself to the whole rhetoric when it comes to, immigrants, especially undocumented immigrants,
Yeah.
especially Latino immigrants, right? Or even I would even hear about the we can't sympathize with the people in Gaza because Palestinians who happen to set up shop in black neighborhoods are racist or whatever.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, okay, that does not have to do with what's happening in Gaza, right? That those are two separate conversations. But to me, even if we're having these whole conversations about anti-blackness, even from other groups that happen to be out groups because they're
Right.
feeling it now, right? That it still goes back to the rhetoric and the propaganda and the talking points that are coming from the top down, and
Yeah.
especially when it comes to the scapegoating to who we're going to look at as far as this is the group that's your problem, right? So like if you are an immigrant that's coming over to the United States and then you happen to see American Black people, they're your problem. And then
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
then like American Black people are looking at people who happen to be Latino. And if they're coming over, oh, they're taking, remember like when Trump said at the NABJ, they're taking the Black jobs. So it's this whole thing that's happening from one side to another. And that's why I get frustrated in some cases because I'm like, okay, so when are we really going to realize that none of these talking points are helping us as a society? Like we can't go this
Exactly.
way. We cannot go this
Exactly.
way. Yes.
Yeah. And it's almost like this, like you're saying, this back and forth with these, these talking points, and we get so lost in the weeds. And I think we fail to realize, um, one of the things about the research that I do is it, race isn't really biological. Uh, it's a social construct, and it doesn't mean, I've already said, people say, "Oh, I don't see race." No, because people are still racialized. We still have that perception aspect on it, and the more that we can educate each other, but also our own communities, and tell people in our own communities, whether it be, our atheist community, whether it be, communities as people of color together, like, you need to educate yourself because you're saying this rhetoric that is not only divisive for our, collective well-being, but it's also just incorrect. And I think really to move forward in this horrible space that we're in with this country, with all this racist bullshit, is education. Unfortunately, we've seen what they're trying to do to education.
Hello.
So it's kind of like, woo, girl, woo.
Talk to me, Pam. Talk to
It's like,
me.
what do we do? Like, and I think at some point we'll be able to bounce back after a while,
Yeah.
but I feel like we just, when this administration is over
Hmm.
any day now, um
Fingers crossed.
we uh,
Oh
I
well.
feel like we really, really need to be aggressive, especially a lot of us who, I know I consider myself a leftist, um, not really as much of a liberal, but the people who are on this left side and in the middle, who are tired of what's going on, I really think we need to be more aggressive about, you know, quit letting the divisive shit, get to us. These little culture wars and, these, racist dog whistles. Just call them out, move on, and let's focus on how we can really, really push for, revamping a system that wasn't built with, honestly, even poor whites in
Yeah.
mind.
Yes.
And, you know, um, it's just, I think we're really going to have to be more aggressive, um, and particularly about, educating the people that we're around. If it's a drop in a bucket,
Hmm.
eventually the bucket fills up, I guess is what
Yeah.
I'm trying to say with that.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. I think that like, the major institution that needs to be revamped in a way that we're actually being able to tackle these issues in a holistic manner is the education system, because we already know that the education in the United States is inequitable. It is woefully deficient in some areas. And for people who are here and we all pay taxes, and we're all, like, contributing to how the government is functioning and making sure that certain social safety nets and education are around so that we
Yeah.
can actually, teach not only just like kids, but also teach adults too, because adults happen to be in educational settings. They go back to school for different reasons,
Yeah.
et cetera, et cetera. That it has to be like part of that core, um that core element in order to really like introduce these particular ideas that are not the same as the rhetoric that we have been poured out for whatever for the longest times. I mean, like, even if you think about in history, like the first thing that that was taken away from slaves was them being educated. No reading, no writing, you know. And I mean, like, and the only arithmetic that you should know is how many pounds that you of cotton that you picked that day. You dig? So,
Yeah.
just to make sure that you met your quota. But other than that, anything that would actually, allow somebody to actually get information that is outside of what's being fed to you, that's what's being attacked. And even nowadays, we have an overt dismantling of the educational department, and
Yes.
saying that, oh, well, we just want, the states to manage their own education systems. And I say, yeah, we've done that before. That's why we had Brown versus the Board of Education, you numbnuts. And it did work. And that's the reason why we actually created the Department of Education, so we can actually create equitable systems so everybody can get educated the same damn way. The hell is wrong with you people?
No, for real.
We ain't my blood pressure medication, child. Let me tell you. But yeah,
You know
no.
what? Same here.
Lord have mercy. But no, but one of the things that I'm hoping that, with research that you're doing, and others that are coming behind you, especially like you young people, because I'm old and crotchety. I have gray hair around here. Don't let the Miss Clara fool you. Um, I mean, we need you. We so need you, because it's going to be. I don't hate to, start quoting Whitney talking about, I believe children are our future. Thank you.
All
Anyway.
right, you better lay low.
Good playing. But I mean, but seriously, like, it's going to be the young people that are, entering into these particular fields, that
Yeah.
are actually, putting marrying science to social issues, and really allowing their voices to speak up and out against systems that have been centuries centuries in process of being oppressive, to the point where we can get to a more perfect union. And the only way that we can really get to a more perfect union is if we can get everybody on the same page and not continuously buy into the bullshit.
Yeah. In you know, it is so hard because with all this dismantling happening, this is why, I'm thinking we really need to be aggressive because they're specifically coming after underrepresented communities in,
Exactly.
these
Exactly.
STEM fields. And
Exactly.
it almost feels like it's uh, and I know it's a purposeful erasure
Oh yes.
because a lot of us that are people of color, when we go into these educational institutions, especially in STEM fields, a lot of the research, yeah, okay, there's really technical part, and racial bias doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It's not random. It's
Right.
not a mysterious, abstract thing in a sense. It follows patterns, and I believe that these patterns can be understood. And instead of maybe focusing on, who's a good person, who's a bad person, because they do have, the racial bias, I think we should really be focusing on, what we're exposed to
Mm-hmm.
and trying to understand how that influences the way that our brains, learn, what to pay attention to, and the shortcuts that our brains take when, we're under pressure, especially, I've mentioned, with some eyewitness misidentification. It largely disproportionately affects Black men,
Yeah.
um, in these eyewitness cases. And
Mm-hmm.
usually, it's a cross race sort of setup there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's really important to realize that and kind of recognize it from a scientific sense.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but at the same time, I don't think any of that excuses harmful outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it does help explain why, this phenomena, it keeps happening, and a lot of it happens in these predictable ways.
Mm-hmm.
And I also hope that people realize that with bias, we can study it with real tools, and look at data and model this data. um, and once we understand that and really kind of get the word out. I'm mostly talking to people like me, stepping out and getting more into this science communication space.
Mm-hmm.
I think we can really stop it from being this abstract thing, um, and something that we can actually do something about.
Yeah.
um, and just really having an honest conversation about what racial bias is,
Mm-hmm.
and how that is a drop in this larger systemic, this racially systemic setup that we have here, particularly in the United States.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that people, and I, to my white homies, you know, it doesn't mean that y'all are bad people, but it would mean something, really negative if the conversations, we can't have honest conversations about it.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. We got to talk to the Jillian Michaels out there. Oh well, every time that somebody brings up racial animus, who says white people bad? Like
yeah,
no,
it's like, no, that's not
that's
what.
that's
That's,
not right. That's not the conversation. The conversation is that it exists, and
you're
and
right.
and because it exists, it affects people differently, and it
It
affects people,
does.
and people who happen to be part of, like you mentioned, like those out groups get the brunt of the shit that comes with that, and that's the reason why we can't stay silent. We need to be, as you mentioned, more aggressive in pushing these narratives, especially in the halls of Congress, in the White House, in the judiciary, in
Hmm.
areas where we can actually make a fundamental change. And on that note, fam, I'm going to give you the last word. And if you want people to be able to find you, and trust me, like the more data that you actually start to gather from your research project, we're going to have you back to do a part two, called
Okay.
Julius's findings. Like I have a whole series in my head, but we'll talk regardless of that. Yeah, let the people know where
Okay.
they can find you, and and if they want to, like, kind of like reach out to you so that they can learn more about the work that you're doing.
Yeah. I'm not I don't have like a big page, where I post a lot of like the science stuff, but if anyone here, oh, I can see the chat now.
Yeah.
If any, hi Mark, if anyone here, finds me on Facebook, my name Julius Calvert, just hit me up, shoot me a message. I know, like I talked to you, Cynthia, so we'll definitely be, talking.
Yeah.
Um, and I'm so glad we got to have this key because it, you know, you could talk about the science stuff. That's really fun. I love nerding out about all that.
Yeah.
But it is just really nice to connect with another person of color who is a non-believer, because there, are few of us that are actually really open about that
Yes. Yes.
and can just have a ball talking.
Yes.
Like we
Yes, all of that. Yes, yes. So yes, everybody, again, just to reiterate what Julius said, like Julius is on Facebook. If you want to friend him, send him a DM, what have you. And then like by the time that Julius actually comes back on the Roots Matters, he will have more get at
yes.
me info stuff for you, because like he'll have a body of work that actually follows his research. So we're just touching the topic right now, but it's definitely a very rich topic, and it definitely needs to be explored. And for everyone who's still out there, remember you can still find me on Facebook. I have my cam Facebook. I also have this particular show, The Roots Matter. I have a Patreon at patreon.com/camglamming. Please just check out my link tree. It will have
Nice.
all the links just to get to all things that Cynthia is doing at this particular time, and including, future people that I'm going to be having on The Roots Matter. The next show that's going to be happening in the next 2 Sundays, we're going to have the affiliate leaders of Black Nonbelievers join us, which will be Tina Marshall from Charlotte, North Carolina, and also Miss Kelly King, who is in the chat right now from Detroit, Michigan. So we'll be back talking about organizing as a secular community, and the uniqueness of even being Black women doing it, and also doing it under the umbrella of Black Nonbelievers. So please make sure you guys check that out. And we have the Kentucky Atheist is going to be coming in about 2 weeks later after that. And yeah, and we're just going to keep on getting this ball rolling. Also, make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification button so that every time that you are around these YouTube streets, you get a notification that says that I uploaded another video or we're going live. And guys, thank you again for everyone who happened to attend and watch the show. You guys mean the world to me. Thank you for participating in the chat, keeping those conversations alive. And remember, dear viewer, dear listener, and dear follower, at the end of the day, the roots matter. Take care, everybody.